Thanks so much, Steffi, and hello to you all. It's wonderful to be here. Um, so, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are presenting from today. For Tim, that's this morning in his home south of Sydney, and that is the Darawal people. And for me, my home in the north of Sydney, and that's the Camaragal people. For our team, collectively, we acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose lands we work upon on the harbour side in Walsh Bay here. Yeah, you can see in the picture. Walsh Bay Precinct in Sydney. So we also pay respects to our First Nations elders, past and present, and those Indigenous to the lands from which you're all joining us from today. So, hey, well, we're Snowmelt, and as Steffi has introduced, we are a small team. There are seven of us, sorry, five of us, and we are 7 years old. We have a diverse set of skills between us, systems thinking, design, strategy, finance, management consulting, social science, research, creative intelligence, visual communication, and philosophy. And as Steffi mentioned, Tim and I both have PhDs, mine in management, exploring the role of design and strategy. Tim's is in planning and urban development and studied systems, smart cities in transport contexts. So, who are we? Well, in our work, we recognise that organisations are navigating increasing levels of complexity and that questions of organisational strategy and structure involves a keen eye into the systems that make up the organisation and related activities, along with the social processes underpinning strategy and plans. To that end, we bring systems to life in the way that we share and understand our context or the context that we're looking at, and in how we work together with our partners in shaping future directions collaboratively. We use artifacts, consider the experience of our work and how to create the most productive engagements that we can to do that. We undertake research, analysis, and integration. And by this, we mean we think about how our recommendation and work is lived and experienced as an ongoing activity, inspiring change and transformation. So we engage with systemic design, and so that is the foundation of our work and our approach, a methodology. And systemic design is the intentional practice of bringing designerly ways of thinking and working into interrogating and understanding the systems that our project partners are working within. So rather than creating, for example, service design or product design based recommendations, we are using those design practices to serve our understanding of how value flows through systems and how actors or the people in them work together and where there are opportunities for change or growth, and how to evolve systems with this in mind. So this expands to focus of strategic questions towards the system as an integrated network of influence and arrangements. So this process for us is deeply powered by a reflective practice. So in all we do, we adopt the ideas of making, seeking inputs and testing, and discussing, reflection and learning. System maps, of course, they form part of this work as a tool we use to facilitate this, but it's not the only outputs and artifacts that we use. So rather than a piece of analysis driving direction and the socialization of strategies, we shape our recommendations over the course of a project with our project partners as a shared learning. Without further ado, I think it's best for us to then show you how we do work and how we bring that to life. So I'm going to hand this over to Tim to talk through a few of our projects.
Thanks, Leanne. And thanks everyone for joining. It's really fantastic to be here and share some of our work. We're looking forward to Q&A afterwards. So if there's anything from these projects that you're interested in, please drop that in the chat and we might be able to come back to it later. So we've selected a couple of projects here, which I think to demonstrate some of the principles that Leanne has just mentioned, we have been experimenting with systems and design approaches for the last 7 years. And I think trying to find the places where it has highest utility with organizations and those areas, I think we've kind of we'll be walking you through today some of those areas. So around strategy, org design, operations, strategic communications, service design, convening, challenges. These three projects that we'll walk through today really demonstrate some of the variety from that really upstream strategic work through to the implementation of new kind of operating models in organizations and between organizations. So the first project we're going to walk through today is with a global engineering firm that we worked with a couple of years ago. This is really falling into the realm of, I think, a traditional strategy consulting challenge. But the way we went about that with them was really informed by a systems and design approach. So this firm was exploring a new area of value propositions. They had been working in heavy infrastructure for a very long time, and they were moving into the more commercial end of kind of stadia, hospitals, etc. So we were working with them on what are the opportunities in that space. It was growing, but that area had just started. I think there was a lot of confusion or limited understanding between a lot of the executives around what this new area was and what are the dynamics of that and the political nature of that work as well. So there was no shared understanding of what that market really was or the changes that were taking place, the trends that were affecting what was happening. And there were very alternate ideas, very different ideas around the executive for what to do and what the organization should act on and how they should position themselves. So in terms of the process, what we did was this was really quite an intense sprint over 6 to 8 weeks. We had a team of around 5 people, and we worked really closely with the leader of this division. And we ran, we did about 20 interviews with external experts who were looking at how the market was evolving and the different dimensions of that. And then about 20 internal participants as well. And we ran a series of workshops and did a very iterative design approach where we would map the system. We would start to overlay what are the trends that are affecting the different actors and activities within that system, and to really articulate over time what's this strategic argument for what the organization should do. So we were really concerned with what the market was doing. So where were the opportunities? And how could this organization, with the capacity and relationships that they have, be positioning themselves to seize some of those opportunities? So we mapped the value chain. We anchored on the capital life cycle, which is how capital moves through the system, which we found as the kind of dominant organizing principle in this sector. We tried to visualize the tacit knowledge, organizational knowledge, that we'd heard within the organization to make that really object so people could think about those different object choices that they had. And we connected with the internal capabilities they had and then also potential external capabilities that they might bring in. So that was kind of an overview of the process itself. So we've got some examples here of what we mean by the system maps. Obviously here there's a lot of material stripped out so they can all be shown on a single slide. But this is the logic of how we often build system maps in a strategic document. So we'll create what we call a base view, which is really the system map in its entirety. We'll create a structure in that, a flow. In this case, it was all anchored on this cycle of capital. The client's operations were the little circle on the bottom right of that. And so we were able to show how they connected with that broader cycle currently. Then we overlaid trends and looked at where were the really interesting intersections of opportunities and things that were converging that they needed to pay attention to. We worked out where was the areas of highest leverage, where capital decisions were made and allocated, and how might they position themselves better to be part of those conversations further upstream. And then ultimately, we had strategic options, which we articulated to say, well, here's, I think it was 5 different choices about how they could be positioning in relation to that. All of this fed into a strategy conversation, which enabled them to move quite quickly to talk about those different choices and ultimately ended up with a direction which was a combination of some of these. So this was about supporting decision making, creating a shared frame of reference, and aligning existing and new stakeholders, and enabling new partnership conversations. So there was a few things that followed about potential organizations to invest in and partner with to make these a reality. Thanks, Leanne. So the next project is more around a university context. So this is working with the University of New South Wales and the setup of a new research centre called the Centre for Next Gen Architectural Manufacturing. And as many of you may know, associated with universities, when grants are signed off, it may have been years after the grant was actually written. And I think this was the case with this project. So a lot of partners came on for the initial proposal. This grant was federally funded by the federal government as a research centre. I think over 6 million Australian was the funds for the centre. They've now had additional funding from bringing more partners on. But really, they had a complex set of organisations involved. They had 15 organisations. Half of those were architecture consultancies, had a few universities, and there's a few industry bodies and peak bodies that were also involved. So really the question was, what is the Centre for Advanced Next Gen Architectural Manufacturing? What is the social process that we need to go through to set this up, to work out what the PhD positions will be, and to create an organising principle and narrative so that people can understand why we are focusing in the areas that we're focusing. So this one was a very complex environment. So we're talking about the digitization of architectural process, everything from pre-design, so ideas and working very conceptually, all the way down to post-design in engineering, manufacturing, etc. So there was a what we went through, Leanne, we can go to the next slide as well, actually. Thank you. Well, what we went through was a big participatory process which engaged all of those stakeholder groups through small working groups, interviews, and started to build a set of insights. And I think over 800 insights were generated through this process, which we were working with academics, so there needed to be a certain level of rigor because there was quite a few business academics who wanted to write about the process and the setup of this centre as well. So they were involved in how that research was done and how we kind of coded it and developed it. Ultimately, we created a map, an interactive map around the value chain of how the design process works in architecture, and then extracting where PhD positions will be most useful to understand the shifting nature of what's happening. And there was 3 main areas emerged around design, data, and management. And that ended up being the organizing structure for those PhD positions. So there were 7 PhD positions within each of those. So there was over 60 stakeholders that were involved in the process over several months. And in the end, there was over 80 PhD positions that were designed, which was whittled back to the 21. Next slide, Liam. So here on the left is a very zoomed out version of the value chain map that was created. So this was uh, in Kumu, which is a platform where you could go in and click on the different nodes and get information about how they're connected to other parts and get different overlays of information and connection between the elements. So this is really an educational tool when people are trying to onboard new partners or PhD students or whatever it might be into the program. They can talk them through the connection of stakeholders and interests in different parts of that value chain. So also identified were about 50 opportunities for follow-on research. There's now been several more partners that have been added and additional funds that have been brought in to explore some of these opportunities as well. It ended up with a very clear articulation of what the centre is, its purpose and its mandate, which has been used for communications and ongoing public engagement since then as well. So that's our second project example. And the final project here is really including this one because it's about really implementing, well, everything from strategy through to implementation. We're with a very large state transport authority. This project we delivered with Fleming Job Hall, which is a leadership and organizational psychology practice that we worked with to develop this new capability inside this state transport authority. So the question that they had was there was a lot of pressure on them, supply chain challenges, shifts in demand for passengers. There were economic pressures, rising complexity in almost every part of their work. And we were working with one particular department that was under a lot of strain from the traditional way that they had been working, which was a kind of waterfall approach to change where they would release a policy every 5 years, and they knew that that was no longer viable. They needed to start influencing much earlier other agencies, other government departments earlier so that they could make the conditions so that the transport system would be able to thrive. So in this case, we worked with them to do a really large scale demonstration project, which would bring together a lot of the new ways of working, governance, ways of thinking that we believed would enable them to grow and have the influence that they needed with the limited resources that they had. So next slide, Leanne. So the activities in this case, we had a relatively small team from Snowmelt and Fleming Job Hall, but we partnered directly on a project internally. So my role was the co-director of that project. I had a partner who was internal to that team, and we had almost around 30 seconded staff into that project team. And we worked very closely with the executive of that function, where we had weekly check-ins. We talked about priorities. What we were trying to introduce was a really more agile, informed way of doing strategy development. So instead of these stage gates of process to develop a plan over a year or two, this was really about creating a far more iterative, dynamic process. So sketching out concepts, testing those in workshops, iterating kind of structure, content, how it would be delivered, thinking about how you engage people in a far more rapid and responsive way. So we had contributions from many different departmental collaborators and contributors. We ran several workshops that were over 100 people, whether it's that department or others that were coming in. And yeah, it was a very large strategy development process. So this one was almost a year in time, and it was really interesting just seeing the embedding some of the design and systems ideas within an environment that doesn't traditionally think like that, and the nature of the work, such complex policy environment where you needed to kind of thread the needle between lots of other plans and strategies that were emerging to find how this one would fit within the others, and also thinking about different needs even across the organization itself. So we created, I think, 35 or so personas, which is within the organization and beyond it, were looking for, how they interfaced with this interest area, how we would engage them, what are the opportunities to partner with them. So it was really about engaging participants much earlier. They were used to engaging as a post hypothesis when they have a strategy or a plan drafted already. We were talking about coming in to much earlier to say, what do you need? How can we work better together to create the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? So next one, Leanne. So the outcome of this project was really a new repeatable pattern for this team and beyond it for delivering strategic projects. There, we left with the executive that we worked with and the seconded team members really equipped for new collaborative strategic facilitation work. And we collect a lot of data as we went through the workshops as well. So 90% of team members thought their experience was very positive. 84% thought the content of the plan that we were developing was very good or excellent. And we ended up with a coalition really of around 300 plus advocates who would support this way of working and the plan itself into the future. So really increase their confidence in working in this more dynamic way. And so it was really just a very large scale demonstration project of a systems and design way of working. And I'll hand back to Leanne.
Thanks. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so I'm conscious of time, and I know that we would like to leave time and space for Q&A, but we do have a couple of other little things we'd love to share with you about what we are learning from the work that we do and how we are wishing to share that and help build practice and inform what this work as systemic design means for designers and for organizations and managers and public sector um, uh, people as we move forward. So one thing we wanted to share with you that through all of the work that we have done, we have noticed that there are lots of patterns emerging about where and how systemic design works well, which elements or aspects of the work land best at which points within the processes with our clients or client partners. And so we've identified these four dimensions of management where the work seems to really stick and where we can have really effective conversations about change. These dimensions are interconnected. They're porous, if you will, but they work hand in glove with each other in terms of forming and articulating what is possible from a systems thinking perspective, but also how the insights and recommendations and the implications of the work then inform what an organization might need to do or see of themselves. So the first one is around strategy and identity. So how an organization defines its purpose and navigates change. And so when we talk about this, we mean things like identity, principles, values, paradigms of operation, its purpose, social or for profit, missions, strategies, theories of change, those kinds of elements. The second one is being governance, so how decisions are made, who holds authority, and how accountability is maintained. What we're talking about here is things like decision rights, objectives and responsibilities, program design, monitoring and evaluation. Then there's relationships, so how connections between people and organizations are built and sustained. So that might be within the organization, but that also might be within the others outside of their direct system externally. So what we're talking about here is who are we connected with, how you are connected with them, listening, collaborating, and co-design methods, and CRM, intelligence, and tracking. And the final one is ways of working. So the operational habits, processes, and practices used to do the work. So the things we're doing every day and how we're working with others. So we're talking about work design, meetings and conversations, templates, stories, team habits and rituals, how we go about doing our day-to-day work. And so we have, as part of our thinking, we've been contributing a lot into the relating systems thinking and design networks. And so we're very interested to share and continue to build on what we're learning about the best ways to work with systemic design view. So I guess we're sharing with you that we have written a paper, and there's an invitation for you, if you're interested in this work, to read on the 4 dimensions of management and see it as a start of a conversation, building our understanding of the work. So yes, and to say that we've also, as part of our contributions to the Relating Systems Thinking and Design Conference last year, have started to pull together insights from some workshops we facilitated within our network of systemic designers, systems thinkers here and globally. And we're developing another piece that's about this collective learning, lessons from the field. How do we all see, for those of us working in this space, the practices being most effective, and what are the appropriate conditions to get us to do this work well? So in that sense, we also note that it doesn't always work well. This is can be difficult, challenging at times. Um, and for us, there are conditions that are more optimal to get this systemic design practice up and running within client partners. So that we find that we need to have strong leadership and advocacy for systemic design projects to be supported and realised. And this often involves a visionary leadership and the roles of those taking the project forward to really advocate for the relevancy and distinction of this work. It is not like a traditional management consulting strategy process in that sense. So it requires someone who believes in it, but also sees how it taps into the current state of business and moving forward. So our work is highly participatory, yet we know that organisations can be extremely busy, and there's not always the opportunity and time or space, maybe capacity or even interest for all members who we wish to participate in this project with, or the project with, to be able to do that. So setting up the conditions and expectations and making sure everyone is okay to be involved in that way is essential. And then as a systemic design process, we do follow design practice. So there's an element of the project direction unfolding through the work, and it feels open and exploratory. And because of that, it can feel uncomfortable and ambiguous, even though we know there's an output and an end from our perspective in terms of where we get to. That can be quite a different distinction in how to articulate strategy or strategic recommendations for an organization. So being clear about that and bringing people on board is essential. Further to this, the process produces different kinds of material deliverables like workshops, system maps. We sometimes use rich pictures as the method to gain insight and expressions of strategy and organizational design. Um, so, for example, our projects aren't filled with, you know, volumes of economic evaluation. They're filled with human insights and documenting the social processes and approaches. And so the outputs can look quite different than a traditional approach to strategy and organizational design. Um, so that can sometimes be challenging, a bit jarring for people who have specific expectations of what a final output might look like in the end. And to achieve systems change, there's a longer timescale often, and Tim reflected that in this transport case. And it also involves multiple stakeholders and requires that kind of inclusion. So that doesn't necessarily look like an 8-week project done and dusted and see you later. It's far more integrated and involved. So it requires that level of commitment, I would say. So just in terms of just really quickly, where do we see our work going? What are we sensing? What's happening in this systemic design space? Um, we're having far more conversation about conversations about how AI is challenging organizations and how to facilitate radical change. For example, leaving behind the old business and building organizations from the ground up to facilitate workforce, to move towards idea capabilities and actions through AI models. The public sector sees the virtues in systems thinking, creating a greater capacity for engagement. So, for example, here in Australia last year, there was a call for our Australian peak agricultural body to articulate a systems thinking approach to understanding the agricultural innovation ecosystem and its potential in Australia, which was so exciting to see. And we can see more of that kind of discourse emerging. The workforce is needing to build capability to more readily adapt. And the project briefs are embedding core questions about the human experience and its supporting change. How do we facilitate change at such a rapid pace and that people aren't being overwhelmed by the processes? What is the human aspect there as it unfolds? And traditional analytic approaches to management are being challenged, yet the scarcity mindset keeps organizations in a safe space. So sometimes that means that people are more likely to go for the tried and tested models. And therefore, there's not yet this broad appetite to experiment with new socially geared models of engagement, which might look really interesting and exciting. But because of the state of, we just need to keep it safe for the moment, we don't know how things are going, there's not necessarily an appetite to try something new. And so our work for us, we've diversified our engagement approach. So we're actually going from grants, brief responses to advocating and taking a more prospective approach to engaging organisations and thought leaders on how to best facilitate systems change. So we're looking at strategic national priorities and sticky social issues. And not to trivialise this, but we have a really big problem in Australia in relation to domestic family violence. And so, for example, what might we do and be able to do with collaborators to contribute to moving the dial on some of those problematic areas around service delivery, as one example. So in the current context, we have a job to do to share how systemic design helps to appreciate the social aspects of work, the other models of engagement that other models can sometimes really overlook. And this approach is new and perceived as a bit more risky, so not a sure thing over tried and tested approaches. Um, Yet the reflective nature of this work is actually really useful to de-risk engagements. So our job is to work with our project partners to capture what it takes organisations and leaders to get comfortable with this approach, with that in mind. And that's very much the reflection in action. Let's experiment, try, test, and see if things fail early, and then go forward. So our work has been an ongoing experiment, and we are developing a complexity engagement model, which is building on these dimensions of management, which I shared before. And so we're continuing to articulate those conditions of practice that underpin our work and help support really effective engagement with our project partners. So really, that is us. I've gone a little bit over what I had intended, but to give you the full sort of what's working, what's not, and that is really over to you then for some questions.